Good morning, everybody. We've been told to move the lectern over so we can see the slides. I'm sure it was just a coincidence that Dr. Armstrong talked about taking care of the elderly, and I'm the next speaker. That had to be a coincidence. I will say, though, I remember in school, we could make ashtrays for our parents, so that kind of tells you a little how old I am, if that helps for a reference. All right, the first slide, please. The talk that you're going to hear is the danger of incrementalization and usurpation. And before you leave to go get fresh and coffee, let me read you a quote where that concept comes from. In 1796, in the farewell address from George Washington, he says, "But let there be no change by usurpation. For though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good, it is customarily the weapon by which free governments are destroyed." So even though you might say, well, this is a topic now, it was a topic at the beginning that the father of our country recognized would be a great threat. So it was his warning to don't change the constitutional powers of the government through unconstitutional means. So that's really what I'm here to talk about. Next slide. And with that, the way it happens, it's a process. So yes, it's with the usurpation, and I just want to make sure you had the actual technical definition. It's the unlawful assumption or seizure of sovereign power to really the derogation of the constitutional rights of the people being ruled. And that's what we're talking about here. Incrementalization or incrementalism, that's the process where it happens. So nobody overnight just says, this is what we're going to do. I mean, sometimes that can happen in history, but it's these series of small steps with these changes that happen. So what I'm going to be talking about today are some examples where this really has happened in our society in cases that I've handled and what we need to do about it going forward. Next slide, please. One of the cases, a good friend of mine, I represented Carter Page, and we filed a lawsuit in DC against James Comey for this is the Russia hoax, right? The FISA abuse, It needed to be done. We were right. You're seeing on the left side of that slide, the United States Court of Appeals, which tells you we had to appeal a bad ruling in the district court. We still lost 2-1 there. They said, well, the case wasn't brought soon enough. I think they were wrong on that, but that's where we are. Now, what happened is the indictment yesterday, what's this indictment about? Well, the FISA abuse started when a political operative was paid about $100,000 to do opposition research. That was fed to the FBI because people running the FBI knew which way that the Obama administration wanted to go. So political opposition research was fed to the FBI, and they said, oh, this is an intelligence report. Well, it wasn't an intelligence report. In fact, in September of 2016, before the election, there actually was an email from the CIA to the FBI saying, be on the lookout. There might be people who are really acting on behalf of foreign interests who say that Donald Trump is tied to the Russian government, but that's going to be false, and it's going to be done to distract people from Hillary Clinton's email scandal. So we listened to political opposition research, called that an intelligence report, which it wasn't. And then we actually had a CIA report to the FBI, which they ignored. That's how usurpation happens. And then Carter Page had to suffer through all that. Now, the indictment, you may think, well, it's just a false statement to Congress. But I think what's behind the indictment of Jim Comey is that he said, oh, I didn't make any leaks. I didn't authorize anybody to make any leaks to the media. Well, what the leak was that I think he's even talked about is that he got a memo into the hands of one of his friends, and he said, I was trying to do this to get a special counsel appointed. That was Robert Mueller. And why? To keep that investigation going, because maybe they thought they could find something. So even though it was known that this was fraudulent, there was nothing behind the Russia hoax, you still had somebody say, oh, I don't really know anything about it. I didn't try to do anything to keep this thing alive even after I knew it was wrong. Well, that's what that case is going to be about, is that he did know that there was nothing to the Russia hoax. And in fact, trying to get that special counsel appointed, Robert Mueller, it was to keep it alive. So all that is just one little $100,000 lie. And look how, as a cancer, what that did and how much time that's really been bad for our republic. So this usurpation, and when people don't follow the constitutional laws, it really can have problems. Next slide, please. Now, what you're here about to hear about is really medical board abuse. And this case is I filed with Heather Gibson in California. And really what we took on is what Dr. Armstrong was covering, is we said your policy for the medical board, by statute, you're supposed to look out for the people, the public health. Well, instead of doing what they're required to do by legislation in California, our complaint says, and you can tell it's 46 pages. It's not a quick read. I mean, it's got a lot of details, but they're all necessary. But what we were getting after is that the California Medical Board, run by a lawyer, for who knows why they would do that, but they said, oh no, we're going to listen to Big Pharma. That's part of this whole emergency use authorization where they said, well, we can't use hydroxychloroquine, or ivermectin. They had to get rid of those being effective drugs for COVID so they could bring in the vaccines. So really what you had is the California Medical Board trying to look out for the financial health of the pharmaceutical industry rather than the medical health of the Californians. And so what did they do? And you know, Dr. Gold's story is perfect. She cured somebody with hydroxychloroquine. They said, if you ever do that again, you're fired. She says, oh, well, I'm gonna quit. I mean, the only way I can keep my Hippocratic oath, according to you, is if I violate it. That's when you have usurpation happen, and that's what happened in California. They'd say, go home, when your lips turn purple, come back, we'll give you remdesivir, as we called it, run death is near, right, in the complaint. And then this'll, if it doesn't kill you, at least it'll make you have kidney failure. I mean, this was a very harmful drug, but this is what they were doing. If hydroxy was 6 cents a pill, and the other vaccines were really expensive, and there wasn't a patent anymore on them, or there was a patent on the expensive drugs the Big Pharma put out, who made money? You look at the stock prices. And so that's where money played a role. It harmed people because you didn't have California Medical Board do what they were supposed to do. So we have as much as said, by your practices and ignoring your statutory mandate, your usurpation of people's freedom, medical freedoms to get accurate information, you have killed people and harmed a lot of Californians. So we'll see where that happens. Now, one of the challenges that this was filed in federal court, so the judge says, well, you have a case right now pending because Dr. Gold was in January 6th, so they were going after, California Medical Board was going after, although we sued him here, they had gone after her medical license to say, giving that speech for 20 minutes in the Capitol on January 6th, that means you're not fit to be a doctor anymore. So we had an accusation from them where they were trying to take her license. Next slide, please. Oh, go back to slide, please. Well, okay, I think that's not the right slide. Let's go to, we had an order from the judge in California, the administrative law judge, who said, and I'll just read it for you. Dr. Gold is going to be publicly reprimanded for her substantially related conduct violating federal law where she got a misdemeanor for trespass. So he said, I'm gonna find your liable for this accusation by the medical board, and so you have to get a reprimand. And of course, the medical board thought they'd won. Next slide, see if we can find that. No. So what happened in January 15th of 2025, and this is something that's developed since the last time I gave this talk, was we appealed that bad ruling, and this is, nope, keep going backwards. You're getting ahead of me. So we appealed the judge's bad ruling, and so the state court judge said, yeah, I think the medical board was wrong, you're going to have to set aside your decision. So what does that mean? That means Dr. Gold has been totally exonerated. But that just shows you she exercised her constitutional rights January 6th, and they said, well, you shouldn't have been there, you trespassed. Well, she's been pardoned on that. But even so, the medical board, the ones who had the bad policy, they were going to use this to come after her license because they didn't like her complaining that Christina Lawson was harming people with the policies of that board. So they used that power to try to take her license, even though a misdemeanor trespass, they'd never done that in the past, had they gone after any doctor for a simple misdemeanor. But because of what she said, going after the medical board, said, well, we're coming after you. We've got that now she's exonerated. But that's the thing, sometimes you have to keep fighting, and it takes a while. All right, let's go. That's it. Keep going. All right, we'll leave it right here. So this isn't all medical board abuse. This is abuse by administrative conduct. So under federal law, there's a thing called the Administrative Procedures Act. And what that means is the government has to follow the rules that the legislature sets. So this is a case where I was representing some bankers. This is 2008. A lot of banks failed. And so they were in litigation with the FDIC. But the reason that their bank failed is because the government said it failed. And how did they do that? They said, oh, these government bonds you bought, these Fannie Mae's, buying into government mortgages, that was negligent to do that. Wait, why did I make a bad decision investing in government bonds? And then when the bonds went down in price, they could say, now you're insolvent, so we can take your bank over. So the bank used its bad bonds that my clients purchased as a basis to say, you're not insolvent, we're gonna take you over. I mean, that's what you're dealing with. So what we did, and they'd never been sued before, they said, well, I know something about this Administrative Procedures Act. So we're going to sue you because there's, and I happen to be an accountant, there are some very specific rules about how you handle, government bonds on your balance sheet. It's called GAAP accounting. Well, the government didn't follow the technical accounting rules by statute they're supposed to. So I sued them. I said, we shouldn't have been taken over. The only reason you said that we're insolvent is because you broke the rules that you're supposed to follow on how you measure financial position. And so they settled with us, and they said, you got to drop this. So this can come up not only in medical boards, it can come up in bank regulations. And next slide, please. And this is another case I handled in Oklahoma. We sued the Department of Interior and the Secretary of Treasury, most of the federal government. And because representing these Indian tribes, when they were brought out in Trail of Tears in 1907 and into eastern Oklahoma, what the government was supposed to do was every year account for the property they held for the benefit of these tribes. They didn't do that. So we were suing them in 2007, said, hey, you failed to account for how you handled our property. And the DOJ lawyers were like, well, this happened 100 years ago. I said, I know, but you never gave us the statement that told what you did, so we can still sue you. And they were wrong about that. They sold off all our land, and then they started buying it back surreptitiously to make the Ouachita National Forest. And I will tell you, it was a fun day to go into DC and say, you better take care of that Ouachita National Forest. It belongs to my clients, and we're taking it back. you can't come in here and threaten us. Oh yeah, I can, because you did the wrong thing. So they ended up saying, well, we'll keep the forest, but we'll pay you $186 million. So this is one where, again, the government didn't follow its rules, where they were supposed to give an accounting to Indian tribes for handling their property. It's supposed to happen every year. They hadn't done it for about a century, and we sued them for it, and because we found out where they weren't handling our property the right way, and we got a big award. Next slide, please. Yes, so a good friend of mine, Eric Naputi, he was marketing vitamins, and this is during COVID again. And they said, well, this is fraud. He says, hey, I didn't make any medical claims. I'm just saying, these are vitamins. This will help you in this. Well, they sued him, tried to run him out of business. And he said, I'm not buckling under to this. And he had the resources to do it, like Dr. Gold has had the resources. Those tribes had the resources. And so next slide. So they dropped the case. He said, I'm not knuckling, you're not going to make me bow. You're in the wrong. And he had the ability to fight back. Next slide, please. Right, that's that same thing. Yeah, it's always fun when you have the FDIC and your clients are the plaintiffs. You're suing the government for what they did wrong. They're not used to being sued. They're terrible defendants. They're just used to being, to bring in the action. Yeah, they're really not good at it. Next slide, please. This is a case where usurpation happened by this criminal statute that was, you're not supposed to throw away records in a criminal investigation. This is out of the Enron case. So that would be obstructing a federal or a congressional investigation. That's the statute cited there. So what, under the Attorney General Merrick Garland, we can say that what those people on January 6th did was obstruct our congressional hearing, and we can get, we can go after them for 20-year, sentences like this. And so that's where all the prosecutors under that regime did this. And then this is before we got Trump, mind you. This is the Supreme Court saying, no, you didn't use that statute the right way. We're going to overturn all those convictions. This is the Fisher case. So the problem is that usurpation put a lot of people, and it made some people say, I'm not going to risk going to trial. It's too big of a penalty. I'll take guilty pleas. So that's your government really taking advantage of its citizens, but the Supreme Court came in and made that right. And then finally, next slide. I had another slide in there. The January 20th was it's the pardon by the president. And let me read this. This proclamation ends a grave national injustice that has been perpetrated upon the American people over the last 4 years. This begins a process of national reconciliation. I do therefore commute and pardon the sentences of everybody who was convicted for the offenses that occurred at or near the Capitol on January 6th. So he just, in 2 pieces of paper, he said, you 1,500 people have been pardoned. So that's where usurpation happened. It was government overreach. And finally, we had an administration that came in and said, we're not going to put up with that. Another case that we have before we get to this Overton window is I just filed a case in California, and this is against Governor Newsom. I didn't think there'd be that many fans of Governor Newsom here. That's a surprise. That caught me off guard. Yeah. So what he used was his emergency powers under COVID to say, if you're non-essential, we can shut you down. It seemed like everybody who was essential lived in Napa Valley or worked at the French Laundry restaurant, right? So the guy that we're representing, Tony Roman, he runs a family restaurant in Huntington Beach, and he said, you don't get to do that to me. I know what our rights are. He says, I'm gonna stay open longer. And it's an Italian restaurant. He rented a billboard in Los Angeles, prominent, said, take the cannoli, leave the mask, or something like that. I mean, he mocked what was happening. Well, when you mock somebody in power, they come after you. So what Governor Newsom did under his emergency actions, he said, I'm now letting our OSHA, well, if you know what OSHA is, that's if you're in a factory and you're in dangerous work conditions, they can regulate you, and that ought to be the case. But he unleashed the California OSHA agents on Tony Roman's restaurant. And they ended up finding, there were 12 people that worked there, not a single complaint, but they were trying to shut him down, and they ended up fining him $187,000. So we're fighting, that's an excessive fine, they fined him late, but that's where you have usurpation, and then you have an agency that goes beyond what it's supposed to do, even under the powers that either Newsom gave him or the legislature gave him. So that's where you just have to stand up and fight that kind of stuff. And Tony Roman, he's a real freedom fighter, and people come into his restaurant. So what do you think that does? That emboldens other people he's around to say, yeah, we have our rights, we can stand up, and I'm not gonna take this, and that's the way to do it. The Overton window here, I'm sure everybody's heard of this term, but it's really what is politically possible. And probably from 1.5 years ago, well, I guess Dr. Ola was about 1 year ago when I was in this theater to see her, her documentary, What is a Doctor? And that was to talk about the scourge of medical mutilation of children, okay? So what happened there by people like Dr. Gold And now we have a president who's doing that too, to say, this is horrific. You cannot consent to this. You know, you can just on a medical science basis, you can't consent to this kind of thing. And you can't have a teacher or somebody on behalf of a child without informing the parents this is going to happen. But this was happening across our country. So now the clock has been turned back on that. So what does that mean? So the Overton window, if you see, it is what is politically possible in the name of ideas the public is willing to consider. So first, when medical mutilation came out, people were, well, it's gender affirming care. I mean, it's Orwellian how they did it. And people said, wait, you're saying God made a mistake, and we're gonna have a permanent solution to a temporary problem, because most of these children grew out of this. Well, you know, when they become 18, if they still feel that way, it's up to them. But you don't do this to a tomboy and, you know, radically change her body like that where they can't ever come back. That's a temporary psychological problem. And I'm not dismissing that there isn't some kind of psychological basis, but you don't put a permanent fix on a temporary problem, and that's what we were doing. But the Overton window is said, America's woken up, said, no more on that. I think on Right to Life, that window is shifting too. So it makes a difference, and that's where I want to end up today. Probably a year ago when Simone was here giving the medical, or what is a doctor talk, or a year and a half ago when I was giving this same presentation, we've had a lot of victories since then. Medical mutilation is one of them. I think we're on the way to having ivermectin being over the counter. So we're heading the right direction on those things. We have a Supreme Court that overturned the January 6th prosecutorial abuses. The president pardoned them. Everything's going the right way. Now, here's the challenge on that. We're at a good plateau. Now, I'm not trying to steal your thunder as a pastor, but what do we really say? When I happened to be out in Phoenix last weekend, it was at the Charlie Kirk service. So when you have 80,000 like-minded people, it's a different feeling when that many people are gathered. And what are we talking about? Charlie would say, we need to have freedom. And he does a good job of tying, or deconstructing, I guess, this term Christian nationalism. And his point was, you need to know, I want people to understand what their political freedoms are. Once they drink from the stream of political freedom, perhaps they'll look up and say, well, where does this originate from? And as we know, well, that's when they're going to look to God. So I thought he did a great job on that. Now, there's been a lot of success, but what are the things we're fighting now? And I'll just quote out, or relay to you out of the Gospel of Luke, when Jesus is tempted 40 days in the desert. At the end of it, what happens? It says, well, Satan went away to wait for an opportune time. So yes, we've had a lot of victories. This is a great plateau. But if you think this is a spiritual good versus evil fight, which I do, then you know that evil doesn't say, I guess we give up and go away. That doesn't happen. I mean, that's the Luke passage. So we have to be on our guard for that. What's the next thing? Is it fighting the ICE, election fraud? Evil's not going to stop, even though good has really seemed to have the upper hand of the momentum right now. I'll leave you with this concept. Studying, I think of us in one way like with the Hebrews. They were the world power in probably 900 BC. They had this beautiful temple that Solomon had. I mean, they were the envy of the world, one of the richest, wisest men that's ever lived. And then what happened? They stopped following the laws that got them there. And when they told the prophets, I don't want to hear what you say, they became like the other nations. Going back to what that George Washington said, hey, we're special here. We have a free government. We better not become like these other countries or we're going to lose what we have. Sort of like the Hebrews. They lost it. And so God says, okay, I'm going to use the Babylonians. You're going to go into exile. And when they were in exile, then God said, for my name, my holiness, to bring me honor and glory, I'm going to rescue you. And so he does that. But when the Hebrews got back, and one of the leaders was Zerubbabel, and he was supposed to build the temple. And it's interesting because he's there building the temple. Some of the old timers said, well, our old temple under Solomon was, it had a lot of gold. It was a lot better. And so then the words of the Lord came to the prophet Zechariah. The hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this temple. His hands will complete it. Then you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. Who dares despise the day of small things, since the eyes of the Lord reigns throughout the earth, and he will see what you have done, putting the capstone in. And what he was saying is to the old timers, don't look back and go, we had it a lot better. He's saying, here's where you are right now. You let it fall apart. I'm bringing you back to rebuild it. Don't despise the small things. So what I'm saying to you is, what are those small things you can do? You're probably registered to vote. Who's that neighbor who's running for the school government? Where are these rights? I'm not saying go, get sued by the federal government. That's not the point of this. But I promise you there's going to be something you can do as a citizen and a person of faith that is one of those small things, and don't despise it, because the reason we've had these victories is, we have some great leaders, but those leaders had to get elected, and they had to have a groundswell of support from people like us. So that's your prayer life as a citizen in this great nation, in this great state. What's that small thing I'm supposed to do? Because that's how we guard against the usurpation and where we've seen things gone wrong in the past. Okay, thanks everybody.